Hi everyone. In this video I'm going to show and talk about some of the recent artwork that I've done both at the back end of last year and the first week, really I suppose now, of January. One of the sort of things I was interested in doing and developing was learning how to paint and draw tanks in a winter environment. So winter wash, whitewash type tanks, or tanks that were covered in snow, etc. And really the Battle of the Bulge tanks game that I've done as part of mine Until the Bitter End kind of was the catalyst for wanting to do that work. I wanted to do that game, so I kind of figured out I need to learn and develop how to draw and paint armor in that environment. So that's where it all started, really. So what I'm going to do is show some examples of some of the tanks that I've done fairly recently and just talk about them and talk through them. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to show some of the reference books that I've used in helping to do that work. So what you're seeing here, this is a T34, and this is in Photoshop. Now, interestingly, I don't really use Photoshop too much for drawing and painting, but it's a bit easier for me to screen record on this particular computer. So this is a T34. This is the first tank that I've painted sort of late summer, I suppose, of last year. It's the first one I've done in the sort of winter whitewash type style that I wanted to learn and develop and sort of iterate on, really. And T34, I've drawn this quite a few times now. It is one of my favourite tanks to draw, and I'll talk probably about this quite a lot in the different tanks that I show, but this is a good example. I'm going to move my mouse key here. One of the things I do like doing is the composition of the view of the sort of chassis and the turret being somewhat at odds with each other. And it gives the tank the purpose. So basically the tank is looking in this direction, but the tank is chassis, as it were, is sort of moving up towards this point here. And I find that quite an interesting dynamic. The palette took the longest time, and I'll talk about palettes quite a lot. So the colours that I've used and the lighting that I've used. So yeah, that's a T34. I'm just going to close that one. And this is, conversely, this is the opposite end. This is the most recent one that I've drawn. This is a Sherman, obviously. This I finished only like a week or so ago. It's got a completely different palette, and somewhat inspired from what I learned from doing that T34 to begin with. But as you can see, again, it's very different. The composition is completely different, obviously, but I'm still sort of using that same sort of technique. The turret is facing where the gun is pointing, obviously, so it's sort of facing more of this sort of direction, whereas the chassis is more facing this way. Gives the tank again purpose. I've drawn the Sherman. I've drawn a lot of Shermans. One of the most drawn tanks I think I've ever done. That's because there were quite a lot of different versions of Shermans throughout the war. It's personally one of my favourite tanks to draw of all time. I absolutely love the Sherman tank from a visual point of view and from the history point of view as well. So yeah, that's a Sherman 70 with a 75mm gun. I've drawn them with the longer Sherman. Let's close that and let's see what's next. Okay, so Tiger 2 is next, sometimes called King Tiger, Royal Tiger, etc., etc. For you all know it is. This one took quite a long time because again I used a different sort of technique for painting and drawing in the winter camo, I'll call it, the whitewash. And this one I wanted more of a worn look to it, so where the paint has been applied by the crew and has come off in time, or you know, I can imagine some of the things I've read about. Sometimes those whitewashes were painted in quite a hurry. And the other thing that is interesting with this piece of art, and I've done this before, is where it's a little bit more asymmetrical on the front. So I knew I wanted to draw it from the front. Kind of felt I was interested to see which piece of art I call the key art or the main cover art for my Until the Bitter End bulge game. So I knew I kind of wanted to potentially look at a Tiger 2 to do that. And basically the front fender system here is I've removed in the artwork. I've done that before on a Tiger 2 and it was I was pleased with the results. It does add a lot more work, to be honest with you. Drawing tank treads is one of the hardest thing about drawing tanks, and the Tiger 2 has quite a more intricate tank tread. It's not the most difficult to draw that I have found, but certainly up there. I'm very pleased with this, how this has come out. It is a very iconic tank of World War II. Sort of mixed, you know, if you when you read the history about the Tigers or Tiger 2s in the Battle of the Bulge, it's quite an interesting topic. Not always the most effective, shall we say, but certainly from a visual point of view, quite a striking piece of armour. Now I have, because we're based here in the UK, I have been down to the Tank Museum and studied the Tiger 2, took loads of photographs, etc., which definitely helped. It's helped on all the art, to be honest with you. So Tiger 2. So next we have what some people will call Jagdpanzer 4 or the 70V Lang. It's basically a tank destroyer or tank hunter for the Germans. One of the things that I tried with this, and I still want to keep developing this a lot more, is to put this sort of foliage around the tanks. There's a lot of photographs I've seen of tanks in the Bulge, where the German crews would have applied foliage to their tanks. Obviously the Allies had, air superiority at times and were walloping them out from the sky. So I thought that would be quite interesting. And this is quite a hard tank or tank type. I mean, they're technically not tanks, but bear with me, that it's quite a hard one. This type is quite hard to draw because the gun is in the chassis, so there's not a turret, which means from a composition point of view, you can't do that thing where I like to do, where the turret's facing different to the sort of the chassis or the direction of the piece of armor. So the guns did have a little bit of movement in them in real life, but not a lot. So you're kind of more restricted. This is the third time I've drawn this tank or tank destroyer, and I've drawn it from the side profile and I've drawn it from the front. I was much happier with this front profile than the previous one I've done, and you kind of learn each time you draw a subject matter like this. You learn what works, what doesn't, and sometimes it's good to sort of go back and look at previous work and think how you could improve it or just change it, really. One of the things that took the longest with this was the palette for the actual glacier plates. I wanted that sort of wintry look, but not necessarily a hard whitewash look. And you'll see in each of these pieces, I've used different techniques for each one, and that's how you develop, I think, as an artist, to try new things and see what works and what doesn't, what's challenging, what can be applied to other pieces. So yeah, that's the 70V Lang. So this is an Easy 8. This is a M4A3E8. It rolls off the tongue. Easy 8, famous obviously from the movie Fury, etc. One of the things I wanted to do here, which I've further developed actually artistically, which is where you've got a really strong external light source. So the idea is that the chassis is in the shade somewhat, and there's a rising sun or setting sun, I should say, or rising sun that's off. You can't see it, but it highlights part of the subject and lights it in an interesting way. Sort of gives it more depth and 3 dimensions, I feel. This, and I've used this technique. I'm drawing a M5A1 Stuart at the moment, which I'm using that same technique on, and I actually think I'm applying it. I'm more happy with the results on the Stuart and the lighting source than I am looking back at this one now. But it's a fun tank to draw. I've drawn it lots and lots of times. This it features on the cover art of Castle Itter. It features on the cover art of American Tank Case from 2 other publishers, and I don't know how many times I've drawn this tank, dozens and dozens, and some of them, they don't always work out, and so therefore I don't share them. But I was quite happy with this. Again, wanted to give this a sort of more human touch. So, we've got the board of wood across the front here with a crate on. And again, lots of examples of photographs of those sort of techniques being used from the crews of these particular pieces of armour. So a fun tank to draw, pretty straight on from the profile. Again, just angle the turret a little bit, and give it a sort of, that helps give it a sense of purpose. This Panzer IV, late war Panzer IV. Panzer IVs are I find them quite difficult in some ways and easier in others. One of the things that's really interesting to draw on the Panzer IV, not just the Panzer IV, but these spare track links on the front front glacier plates here, it gives them an subject of interest, I find, and which helps break up basically these flat panels. Sometimes flat panels you can break up artistically lots of different ways, and that's through the palette and the brushwork. The bits that are challenging are these shirts and these sort of plates that were attached to the side of the piece of the arm of the tank, and Panzer IVs often had them, depending on the type of Panzer IV and the conditions, etc., and the year, etc., on the turret and sometimes on the side here. I didn't find too many examples of side Scherzen in the photography, but I have found some on the turret, so I've just put them on the turret. It's quite a boxy. That's not really an artistic word, but what I mean by that, it's basically more than some of the tanks I've drawn. I find this one, you've got this rectangle here, rectangle there, on the front of the tank, and then quite different on the turret, which is interesting. And then you've got this sort of more central cupola on the top there. So that's Panzer IV. Again, slightly different sort of techniques on the palette and the brushwork for the wintry whitewash. This definitely, I went for more of a whitewash look, but that's been weathered. So it's it's not just been applied by the crew; it's been in the field, as it were. So, and then finally, this is a US gun carriage M10. Another subject that I have drawn and painted a lot of. I have a real affection for the M10 artistically. I find it a fascinating subject to draw. Never tire of it, and I think it's because of the sort of angular shape of the chassis. So this angle here, which is also reflective in the angle work on the turret and the sort of mantlet here as well. And that's offset visually by the round, softer, because it's more of a circular, of the actual gun barrel as well. So there's lots of, artistically, there's lots of interesting angles, for want of a better description, in the actual subject matter. And it's the same angle sort of work on the tank treads. Now, obviously, when designers design tanks, not thinking from an art point of view, from a visual point of view at all, but it's interesting from a visual point of view to study these subjects. And I think also, actually, as I talk about those sort of softer angles, the circular work, so of the actual with the mantlet here and the circle here and the circles of the handles here, etc. So visually, there's quite a lot of interesting elements to this particular subject matter, and you've got angle work on the actual Allied star as well. So yeah, it's sort of it's one of my favourite tanks to draw, and I've drawn it loads of times. It's there's quite a lot of photos of the M10, but I always feel it's often overshadowed by Shermans or by other sort of US tank destroyers, like the Hellcat or the Shermans with the 76mm guns, and the British used them. They had the Achilles as well, which is sort of a 17-pounder, and that's I always find overshadowed by the Firefly. So I'm quite keen to give this piece of armour its time in the spotlight, as it were. So I was really pleased with this. This kind of, actually, this one I drew I drew and painted pretty much straight after the T34. So the piece you saw at the beginning, T34. This was the second one I did straight after that, and applied quite a different technique. So this one I kind of wanted more of a snow and frost sort of feel. That's what I put in my notes, rather than the whitewash sort of feel, and that made it quite hard, especially around the running gear, around the bogies and the tracks. And I think there's some things I've learned from how to do that effectively, and some techniques I'll definitely use again in the future. But I do like this sort of effect where you've got the snow and the coldness of the winter offset against the colour of the armour, which I've very deliberately desaturated in terms of the sort of tones and the colours that I've used when I create my palettes, for doing that. Now I'm going to try and let's see if Photoshop's going to let me zoom in a little bit. These are big files, so to give you some example, I don't draw them at this scale. I'm drawing them, and you can see here, more like at this sort of scale. So if it was a real life palette, canvas, it would be, my arms, 6 foot, something like that, I guess, maybe even bigger. But digitally, when I'm drawing at this sort of size. You can see my pencil lines here. That actually, and you can see here, even in the brushwork, it's quite loose. A lot of people have described, other artists have described my work as quite, in many ways, in terms of the brushwork, it's quite loose. Those lines give you a perfect example of that. They're not, I'm not into technical, although I admire it greatly and use it as reference. I'm not a technical drawer. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to give an artistic impression of the subject. So you can see that it's, and also interestingly with this particular piece, and again this is kind of what I use a lot in my contrast. I think you can see, let's zoom in a little bit here. So you can see here that there's a lot of white, which is basically where I've not painted the colour in deliberately. And then if we move over to this piece of the track work here, it's black, and that is super deliberate. It helps create that sort of contrast feel, which gives the subject matter its depth, as well as a whole bunch of other areas. So, and it's just again deliberately painted in black here. In these lighting conditions, this would not be black, and this would not be black, and I choose to do that very deliberately and artistically. So yeah, there's the M10. So I thought next I'll just talk a little bit about some of the reference that I use. Now, in terms of reference, you can get a lot of reference off the internet, and of course I did so, but really for me the main reference that I use is from books. I really love history books, and I've got an ongoing, quite sizable library of books that specialise on tanks and armour, and that I've built up over the years from drawing and painting them. And I want to highlight 3 books that I've used quite a lot on this work that you've just seen, certainly pertaining to the Allied and German tanks from sort of the Battle of the Bulge era, or from the setting. No particular order. The first one is Armoured Warfare in the Battle of the Bulge, 1944 to 45. This is from Pen and Sword Games. It's from Anthony Tucker Jones. He actually does quite a few books in this sort of range, these Images of War range. It's mostly photography, and it's a good starting point. And I've used some of the photographs in here quite a lot. Not too heavy going, I would say, and some good photographs. And it gives you sort of some of the details of some of the armour in those conditions. And yeah, I've used that quite a lot. Second one I want to talk about is tanks in the Battle of the Bulge. If you're going to do a game or project about tanks in the Battle of the Bulge, then a book called Tanks in the Battle of the Bulge is probably a good place to start. And indeed it is. This is from Stephen Zaloga. Stephen Zaloga is certainly a World War II historian and authority in my opinion, on the subject matter of armour in World War II. And I have many books penned by Zaloga. This is from Osprey Publishing. Again, it's quite light. It's not too chunky. It's great photography in here and a great amount of prose. I also used this one probably only a little bit in the sense of all the other books I'm going to talk about, all the photography is in black and white, obviously, but this has some colour artwork in it, and it helps give a sort of a starting point for thinking about palette. I don't use the palettes from these books at all. Creating my own palettes is part of the enjoyment, and you can tell, I think, when you look at my art compared to other artists' work. But looking at colour work of real tanks is always important. So it helped with that. And it's a really good read as well. Highly recommend that one. So if you want a book off the shelf, easy to get, on tanks in the Battle of the Bulge, then that's the one. And then the final book I want to talk a little bit about is, which is quite different, is Armoured Attack 1944 from the same author, from Stephen Zaloga. It doesn't just cover the Bulge. It covers US Army tank combat in the European theatre from D-Day to the Battle of the Bulge. And there's a second book. There's one for 45. I've got that as well. And I have them both next to each other. I use these a lot, to be honest with you. When it comes to drawing Allied armour, these are the books I use. It's much more chunky, and it is, I'll try and show an example here very briefly. It's purely photography, and the photographs are wonderful. Obviously the quality of photography differs, but just as a volume of really useful and great and photographs to study and look at, and study. These are the ones. I don't have the other one to hand, unfortunately. It's probably next to my bed. But I use them extensively. Oh, here it is, on the shelf over here. This is Armoured Victory in 1945. Combat in the European theatre from the Battle of the Bulge to Germany's surrender. So I use both of these two extensively. They're probably my favourite books on that subject. Highly recommend them. Not quite so easy to get. You should be able to get them, second hand, I would have thought. Highly recommend them, both of them. And I use them, use all the books extensively. What I normally do is photograph the pages that I'm interested in and having them on a second computer next to me when I'm drawing, so I can keep sort of referring to, and often take a break in drawing. I don't sit and paint and draw in one session, take a break, and these are the sort of books that I enjoy just flicking through as I'm having a cup of tea or something, and just looking at some of the particulars, whether it's the lighting or the detailing of the tracks, or it's just bogies or whatever it happens to be, or ideas for how to make the tank look a little bit more human, I suppose. The sort of stuff that the crews put on the tanks. Very useful, very good. Highly recommended both those two. So hopefully this video was of some interest, or just general interest in some of the tanks I've done, or the artwork. Would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for their support for all my games and YouTube channel and artwork that I do. In particular, I have a Kickstarter on right now, which is this Kickstarter about this subject matter, tanks in the Battle of the Bulge, as a war game, print and play war game. I'll put the link for that in this description, so if by seeing the art it sort of makes you interested in learning a bit more about the game, then please follow the link and just learn more about the game on the Kickstarter page itself. But yeah, thanks for all the support for that project. It's absolutely wonderful. Thanks for all the support for the channel, of course, and all the artwork that I do in my spare time, and thanks as always for all that support. If you'd like to see more videos on this type of topic, if you're interested in seeing more of my art as a video form, then please leave a comment. I'd love to do more of these. I think I'm going to do them anyway, but it's always great to see if there's anything that you'd particularly like me to focus on or talk about when I show this kind of content. So please leave a comment in the comment section, and take care, and thank you as always.